There comes a point where you're just tired, not because you're lazy, not because you gave up, but because you've been trying so hard for so long and nothing seems to move. You keep showing up, doing everything right, doing more, thinking more, fixing more, but somehow it all still feels stuck. And it's not just frustrating, it's soul-draining, like you're pouring everything into a life that refuses to respond. You start questioning yourself, questioning your path, wondering if maybe something's broken. Maybe it's you. But what if it's not? What if the problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough, but that you've been trained to believe effort is everything, while trust, real grounded trust, has been labeled weakness? The Stoics taught that peace comes not from controlling everything, but from aligning ourselves with the natural rhythm of life. Marcus Aurelius didn't force the world to bend. He bent his mind to meet it. And maybe that's the shift we need. Less forcing, more flowing, less panic, more presence. Because the truth is, the more you trust, the less you'll need to try. Not because you stop caring, but because you stop wasting energy on what was never yours to carry. And I promise, there's a kind of strength that only reveals itself when you stop chasing and start listening. If something in you feels seen right now, if this message is helping you breathe a little deeper, there's one simple free favor I'll ask. Hit that subscribe button. It tells me you're someone who's done performing and ready to start transforming. Let's keep walking this path of clarity, calm, and quiet power together. Do you know why it hurts so much when things don't move despite your best effort? It's not just the stagnation that stings, it's what we make that stillness mean. We've been taught, repeatedly, that effort is a currency, that the more you give, the more you're worth. So when you give everything, when you stretch yourself thin and life doesn't respond, it feels personal, as if the silence is a reflection of your value. Not the strategy, not the timing, not the alignment, but you. But that's a dangerous lie. One many of us swallowed early, without question, because somewhere along the way we confused motion with meaning, as if staying busy could protect us from disappointment. But what if the issue was never your discipline, your hustle, or your sacrifice? What if the real problem is that you've been conditioned to trust only in what you can control? Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And this is what we do. We unconsciously grip every task, every deadline, every relationship, believing that if we can just try hard enough, nothing will fall apart. But this constant striving isn't strength, it's survival. And survival has no room for trust. It only knows how to tighten, to perform, to cling. Trust, by contrast, is a letting go. And letting go is terrifying when control has become your comfort. But here's what no one teaches us. Trust isn't passive. It's not a shrug or a surrender. Trust is active. It requires clarity. It requires courage. It asks you to step back, to breathe deeper, to say, "I don't know how this will work out, but I no longer need to force it to." That's not weakness. That's a strength most people never touch. Socrates believed that the unexamined life is not worth living. And if you take a hard look at your patterns, the urgency, the over-explanation, the chronic exhaustion, you might realize you've been living inside a loop that tells you your worth is only as good as your output, that unless you're tired, you haven't tried hard enough. But exhaustion isn't a badge of honor. It's often a sign that you're leaking energy into everything you're not meant to carry. And effort, without alignment, becomes suffering. You can be sprinting at full speed and still be lost. That's why trust matters, because trust puts you back on the path, not by speeding things up, but by reconnecting you to what matters. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And the truth is, trust starts with knowing who you are when there's nothing to prove. Who are you without the striving, without the need to constantly earn your place? Who are you when you're not micromanaging every outcome? Most people never find out, because silence feels uncomfortable, space feels threatening, stillness feels like failure. But stillness is where the recalibration happens. That's where insight lives. Plato taught that a life without balance is a life without harmony, and balance doesn't come from doing more. It comes from doing less, but with greater intention. When you stop living on autopilot, when you stop forcing things just to feel safe, you start to notice something else. Life begins to speak, in quiet nudges, in unexpected peace, in the moments you didn't plan but somehow feel right. That's trust. And the more you lean into it, the more you realize you were never meant to chase everything. You were meant to recognize what's already yours. There's power in releasing what doesn't respond to your presence. There's clarity in walking away from the things that only survive on your anxiety. And no, it won't always be easy. You'll be tempted to go back, to fix, to prove, to push. But each time you choose stillness over panic, you reclaim your energy. Each time you choose clarity over chaos, you return to yourself. This is the real work. Not grinding yourself into dust for temporary progress, but learning to trust that what's aligned doesn't need to be forced. That when you stop measuring your worth in productivity, something else shows up. Peace. Not the peace that comes from nothing happening, but the peace that comes from knowing you no longer need to force life into shape. You are shaping it by trusting it, and that in itself is the beginning of a very different kind of power. Most people think trust means waiting around, doing nothing, like sitting on the sidelines, hoping life will toss you a bone. But real trust? It's not passive. It's power in motion. It's not the absence of action. It's the presence of alignment. A quiet kind of strength that doesn't shout or scramble. Trust is a way of moving through life without needing to wrestle it into shape, without constantly bracing for impact or chasing what already belongs to you. You don't need to force people to stay. That version of love, the one that makes you shrink yourself just to be chosen, isn't love. It's fear dressed up as effort. You don't need to chase timing either. What's meant for you will arrive when you're ready, not when you're anxious. And you definitely don't need to micromanage every outcome just to feel secure. Control might give you the illusion of safety, but it robs you of peace. When you trust, you stop sprinting into the future, trying to fix what hasn't even happened yet. You stop rehearsing every scenario, crafting backup plans to backup plans. Instead, you come back to the only place you've ever had power, this moment, right here, where your breath is, right here, where your intuition whispers truth, if you're still enough to hear it. Plato once said, "The first and best victory is to conquer yourself." And that's what trust really is. It's the internal win. The moment you realize you don't need external control to feel internally steady. It's letting go of the compulsion to react, to fix, to perform, and replacing it with presence, with knowing. So ask yourself this: what if the next breakthrough isn't about trying harder, but finally allowing? What if the answer isn't hiding in more effort, more strategy, more stress, but in less resistance? We're so used to working for everything that the idea of receiving feels foreign, suspicious even. But not everything valuable comes through struggle. Carl Jung said, "What you resist persists." And many of us are resisting the very clarity we crave by refusing to slow down, to trust the unfolding. Allowing doesn't mean sitting back and watching your life drift by. It means no longer pushing against the current when the river already knows the way. It means acting when it's time and resting when it's not. It means knowing when to speak and when silence will speak louder. This is the rhythm of trust. It doesn't abandon motion, it just rejects the frenzy. When you finally stop trying to bend life to your timeline, you begin to notice something strange. Things start happening with less friction. People show up without needing to be chased. Opportunities open without being forced. Even your body relaxes because it no longer thinks it has to hold everything together. Aristotle believed that nature does nothing in vain, which means the pauses, the delays, the detours, they aren't voids, they're part of the pattern. But if you're too busy rushing, you'll call them failures. If you don't trust the process, you'll keep mislabeling growth as stagnation, healing as weakness, stillness as being stuck. But when you learn to allow, you reclaim your energy. You stop scattering your presence across 100 imagined futures and come back to what is. You begin to move not from panic, but from purpose. You act not to prove, but because you are aligned. And that shift, that's what turns effort into impact. That's what transforms chaos into clarity. Socrates once warned, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." He understood what many of us are still trying to grasp. Activity is not the same as effectiveness. Movement doesn't always mean meaning. And trying harder without direction only exhausts the soul. So maybe the next time you feel like doubling down, like fixing something that isn't broken, like chasing validation or forcing a door open, pause, breathe, ask, what if this isn't about doing more? What if this is my moment to trust more? Because that subtle shift from force to faith, from control to surrender, is where your real power begins. Not in how much you can carry, but in how much you're willing to let go. Why do we try so hard to prove something that's already true? Why do we spend so much of our lives exhausting ourselves for a validation that, deep down, we already deserve? Somewhere along the way, the idea took root that who we are isn't enough, not unless we package it, polish it, and parade it around for approval. That raw presence must be backed up with performance. So we explain ourselves even when no one's asking. We analyze every detail of our day until our minds are worn thin. We keep showing up long after our spirit has checked out. Not because we want to, because we're afraid not to. There's a difference between effort and fear, and most of us are running on fear while calling it commitment. We say yes when our bodies scream no. We keep our schedules full because empty space feels unsafe. Rest starts to look like weakness. Stillness starts to feel like failure. And slowing down becomes the biggest risk of all. Because what happens if we stop running? What if everything we've been holding together just falls apart? Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." And maybe that's part of it. Maybe all this proving, all this noise, is an attempt to outrun our own fire, to avoid the silence that might expose the truth we've buried under our productivity, that we never believed we were enough to begin with. But here's what changes everything. What's meant for you doesn't need to be chased. You don't need to convince it. You don't need to wear yourself out to earn it. You just need to be still enough to recognize it. And recognition requires presence, not performance. Think about that for a second. Recognition is an act of awareness. It's not about effort, it's about clarity. And clarity doesn't come when you're tangled in anxiety, trying to manage every moving part of your life like it's a crisis waiting to happen. Clarity arrives when you stop trying to be impressive and start being honest. When you stop bracing for disappointment and start leaning into trust. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And yet, how can we truly know ourselves when we're constantly bending to meet expectations that aren't even ours? When we're so busy becoming what we think we need to be, we forget what we actually are. This is the trap, mistaking fear for discipline, effort for worth, movement for progress. But there's a moment, subtle and quiet, where something shifts. You start to see the difference between what you've been chasing and what's been quietly waiting for you to slow down, not to stop, but to become aware, to notice the signs, to recognize the alignment. And you can't do that when you're stuck in the cycle of proving. Plato once said, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." But beginning again, beginning from truth instead of fear, that requires more courage than all the chasing in the world. Because now, the work isn't about earning something outside of you, it's about reclaiming what was already inside. And here's the hard part. You will be tempted to go back, to explain yourself, to try a little harder, to be a little louder. But each time you choose stillness over desperation, each time you say no from self-respect instead of yes from fear, you reclaim something vital, your alignment. Socrates said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." And thinking for yourself, feeling for yourself, living for yourself, that's what trust makes possible. Not just trust in life, but trust in your own enoughness. Trust that you're not falling behind. Trust that rest doesn't mean you've quit. Trust that what's real will always know how to find you, without the theatrics, without the burnout, without the chase. Because the moment you stop trying to prove you're worthy is the moment you realize you already are. Trying is noisy. It clutters the mind, fills the calendar, and floods the nervous system with urgency. It's a constant hum in the background, always reaching, always adjusting, always proving. You can feel it in your shoulders, in your jaw, in that restless part of your mind that refuses to settle. It's the inner narrative whispering that unless you're fixing something, you're falling behind. Trying demands attention. It wants to be seen. It wants results. It operates from a place of lack, because if you truly felt whole, would you be pushing this hard to fill the silence? Trust, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a finish line to feel fulfilled. Trust just is. It lives in the subtle, in the pause between thoughts, in the exhale after a long day, in the decision not to force what doesn't feel right. Trust isn't passive, it's presence. It's the ability to hold stillness without interpreting it as failure. And ironically, the moment you stop grasping, the very things you were chasing start to arrive, not because you went after them harder, but because you finally became still enough to receive. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." So much of what we label as effort is actually resistance in disguise. Resistance to uncertainty, resistance to slowing down, resistance to not knowing. But that resistance, however dressed up as ambition, creates tension, and tension blocks clarity. It blinds you to what's already unfolding right in front of you. Think about it. How many poor choices have come from that fear of waiting too long? How many jobs, relationships, conversations, or commitments have you leapt into just to escape the discomfort of patience? And how often did you end up right back in chaos, telling yourself it was progress when, deep down, it was just motion? Silence scares people, not because it's dangerous, but because it reveals. It reveals all the internal noise we've been avoiding with productivity. It holds up a mirror to the parts of us that are still learning how to be okay without external proof. But trust teaches you that silence isn't empty, it's sacred. It's where life starts to breathe on its own again. It's the space where intuition speaks louder than fear, where guidance doesn't scream, it whispers. Plato once said, "The greatest wealth is to live content with little." And that kind of contentment, the inner stillness that doesn't crave constant stimulation, isn't found through grasping. It's found in letting go of the belief that urgency equals importance. It's found in stepping back, even when every fear says step forward. Trust allows you to make decisions from clarity instead of pressure. It creates room to feel before acting, to listen before speaking, to align before moving. And that space? That's where you start to see the difference between what's truly meant for you and what you've been conditioned to chase. Trying may get you there faster, but trust ensures that when you arrive, you're not empty, that you haven't lost your peace, your center, or your sense of self in the process. Socrates said, "Beware the barrenness of a busy life." And if you've ever gotten everything you wanted only to feel more anxious than ever, you understand what he meant. In a world obsessed with pace, trust is a rebellion. It's a radical return to inner knowing, a soft refusal to panic, and a powerful reminder that not everything valuable needs to be hunted down. Some things, especially the most meaningful things, come not through force, but through readiness. And sometimes readiness looks like doing less. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally learned how to receive. If you've spent years believing that pain is the price of progress, then trust will feel dangerous. It won't feel like freedom, it'll feel like failure. Because when you're used to equating worth with struggle, anything that doesn't hurt enough starts to feel suspicious. Letting go, even just a little, feels like you're slipping, like you're falling behind. But the truth is, you've been climbing a mountain that may not even be yours to climb. And that's where it gets hard, because for so long, the suffering became part of your story. You've tied your identity to the hustle. You've wrapped your self-worth around how much discomfort you can endure. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that burnout was discipline, that the more exhausted you were, the more dedicated you must be, that if you're constantly anxious, constantly wired, constantly on edge, you must be on the right path. But what if all that tension isn't a sign you're progressing? What if it's a sign you're out of alignment? Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And for many of us, that unconscious belief, the one that says you must suffer to succeed, is quietly steering the wheel. It makes rest feel lazy. It makes ease feel unearned. It convinces you that unless you're proving something, you're not enough. But here's a different thought. What if the life you want doesn't live in effort? What if it lives in alignment? What if it's not about grinding until you collapse, but about choosing what resonates with who you are, deeply and truly, without needing to force it into place? That shift from effort to alignment is subtle, but it changes everything. Because alignment doesn't ask you to abandon responsibility. It asks you to stop abandoning yourself. It doesn't mean you stop showing up. It means you stop showing up from a place of desperation. When you move from alignment, your actions still matter, but they're no longer soaked in panic. They're rooted in clarity. Aristotle believed that pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And it's true. When you're aligned, work still requires effort, but it doesn't feel like suffering. There's rhythm, there's purpose, there's breath. You're not dragging yourself through every day hoping you'll finally feel worthy at the finish line. You feel it now, as you walk. But here's the catch. Letting go of the suffering means letting go of the story that made you feel valuable through it. And that can feel like losing yourself. Because who are you if you're not proving something? Who are you without the pressure? You're someone who's beginning again, not from lack, but from wisdom. Someone who finally understands that peace isn't the absence of effort, it's the absence of self-betrayal. Someone who's realized that your body wasn't made to be at war with itself, that your mind wasn't meant to live in a constant state of fight or flight, that your spirit wasn't born to survive every day. It was born to live. Socrates once said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." That's what alignment offers. Not a rejection of growth, but a redirection. Away from punishment and toward possibility. You begin to build, not from fear, but from faith. Not because you're trying to escape something, but because you're finally moving towards something real. Letting go will still feel wrong some days. You'll still feel the urge to overdo, overthink, overcompensate. But with time, trust becomes easier. Your nervous system softens. Your inner dialogue becomes kinder. You stop confusing chaos with progress. And what once felt unfamiliar, ease, rest, flow, starts to feel like home. And when that happens, the world around you starts to shift too. Not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped pushing at all the wrong things and started listening to the right ones. You weren't made to clench your jaw through every decision. That tightness in your chest, the tension in your shoulders, it's not a badge of honor. It's a sign you've been carrying life too rigidly, too fearfully. Somewhere along the line you learned that pressure means progress, that if something doesn't feel heavy, it must not be working. But that kind of thinking turns life into a constant emergency. You begin walking on edge, not out of passion, but out of survival. And that's not what you were built for. You weren't designed to be in a perpetual state of bracing. You weren't meant to second-guess your every step, hoping that anxiety could somehow predict the future. There's another way, one most people forget exists, where decisions don't rise from panic, but from presence. A way of moving that begins with grounded clarity, not the fear of being left behind. Plato said, "Better a little which is well done than a great deal imperfectly." But we live in a world that rewards speed, not depth. We rush because we think stillness is risky, that if we're not leaping, we're falling behind. But the truth is, some of the worst decisions are made when we're just trying to escape the quiet. We run, not because the path is clear, but because the stillness makes us uncomfortable. Stillness, though, isn't absence, it's information. It's where the deeper answers live. When you stop scrambling to force the next step, you start to feel when something genuinely calls you forward, not out of desperation, not out of fear, but from something far more powerful, alignment. Carl Jung once observed, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." That awakening doesn't come from pushing, it comes from pausing, from choosing not to act until the action feels rooted, not reactive. Peace, in this way, doesn't slow you down. It sharpens your focus. It simplifies what once felt tangled. It doesn't delay progress, it directs it. Because when you're aligned, you no longer need to debate every move. You stop second-guessing yourself at every turn. You don't need 5 backup plans to feel safe. There's an inner knowing that begins to guide you quietly but unmistakably. You begin to trust that not every door needs to be kicked open, that the ones meant for you will respond to presence, not force. Aristotle believed that happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. And yet, so many of us trade joy for control. We white-knuckle our way through choices, believing that tension will keep us safe. But happiness, true, sustainable happiness, grows in environments where peace is allowed to speak. You don't need to abandon your ambition. You just don't need to let fear drive it. There's a way to move through life without the rush. A way to build, to lead, to grow, not by clenching your jaw and sprinting through discomfort, but by choosing the path that feels like an exhale, not a breakdown. Socrates once said, "The shortest and surest way to live with honor in the world is to be in reality what we appear to be." Alignment is that reality. It's when your inner world and your outer choices finally begin to match. When the things you say, the things you pursue, and the things you tolerate are no longer in conflict. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. And that's what peace offers, not perfection, but permission. Permission to slow down, permission to wait, permission to stop running just because the world expects you to. Because in the stillness, something deeper wakes up, the part of you that knows exactly where to go next, without the panic, without the pressure. And that part of you, that's the one that leads to everything real. You don't need to fight your way into a room that wasn't meant for you. You don't have to exhaust yourself trying to prove that you belong somewhere you were never meant to stay. That kind of striving doesn't lead to belonging. It leads to burnout. And maybe you've felt it, the subtle ache of trying to fit into a space that requires you to shrink, to perform, to explain your worth rather than embody it. You don't need to convince life to notice you. You were never invisible to the things truly aligned with you. You don't need to wave your arms, raise your voice, or overcompensate just to be seen. The more you try to prove, the more disconnected you become from your own center, because at some point, trying to be enough begins to pull you away from the part of you that already is. Just stop resisting your own flow, that quiet inner rhythm that's always been there, beneath the noise. It's not always fast, it's not always loud, but it's always honest. And when you let yourself follow it, something strange begins to happen. People start showing up differently, not because you demanded it, but because you changed the energy in the room simply by being rooted, by being real. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When you stop resisting who you are, when you stop fighting for spaces that ask you to abandon yourself, something shifts. Opportunities don't feel like tests anymore. They feel like invitations. Conversations feel less like transactions and more like connections. You begin to speak not to impress, but to relate. And in that space, people feel you. Not just hear you, feel you. Not because you pushed, not because you were louder or quicker or sharper, but because your presence made space for something genuine. You stopped trying to control the narrative and instead started living the truth. And truth has a way of attracting what's real. When you no longer need to be chosen, you start choosing with discernment. You stop settling for things that vibrate beneath your value. That's the kind of power trust brings. Not loud, not dramatic. It doesn't need to dominate a room to be felt. It doesn't need applause to feel valid. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows that alignment will always do more than performance. It's the grounded strength that doesn't panic when the path isn't clear because it trusts that clarity isn't rushed. Plato believed that truth is the beginning of every good thing, both in heaven and on earth. And trust is what allows truth to rise. When you stop hiding behind your efforts, your masks, your explanations, your essence begins to speak for itself. That's when things start moving, not because you chased them, but because you finally stopped getting in your own way. There's something magnetic about someone who's not trying so hard, who isn't desperate to prove, to please, or to persuade. Their energy feels different. It's safe. It's steady. It draws in people who don't want the show. They want the substance. And that kind of presence, that kind of still unapologetic presence, it can't be manufactured. It has to be lived. Socrates once said, "Be as you wish to seem." That's what trust allows. The gap between who you are and how you show up begins to close. You become consistent, internally and externally. And from that place, you no longer need to rush, chase, or perform. You just need to stand still, fully, authentically, unshaken. Because when you stop resisting your own flow, you don't just find peace, you become peace. And peace doesn't push, it pulls. It doesn't chase, it calls. And what responds to that call? Everything real, everything meant, everything lasting. So how do you start trusting when all you've known is control? When your first instinct is to overthink, to plan 10 steps ahead, to step in and fix before anything even goes wrong? Letting go of that pattern doesn't happen overnight. It starts in small, quiet ways, like pausing before you react, not jumping to answer every email, fix every situation, or explain yourself just to keep the peace. That pause is powerful. It creates space. And in that space, something begins to shift. You begin to say no without guilt. Not because you're trying to be difficult, but because you're finally listening to yourself. You stop bending your boundaries to make others more comfortable. You stop saying yes just to avoid feeling guilty. You begin to trust that your needs matter too, and that saying no doesn't make you selfish, it makes you honest. And then there's the stillness, the silence that used to make you uneasy, maybe even scared. At first, you want to fill it with noise, with motion, with anything that feels productive. But you don't. You stay with it. You breathe into it. And instead of fearing the silence, you begin to hear something in it, your own voice, the one that's been buried under all the pressure to prove, the voice that doesn't rush or worry but simply knows. Carl Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And that's what happens. You wake up, not to some dramatic new version of yourself, but to the version that's been there all along, the version that doesn't need to perform, or panic, or perfect things to feel worthy, the version that knows you're already whole, already enough. This is trust. It's not about blind hope or pretending everything is fine. It's about coming home to yourself, learning to feel discomfort without trying to fix it right away, allowing hard moments to pass without rushing to control them. Trust doesn't ask you to be passive. It asks you to be present. It asks you to stop running and start listening. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom, and trust is part of that knowing. It's the choice to stop outsourcing your value, to stop chasing approval, to stop trying to manage every outcome. Because when you truly trust, you no longer need to hold everything together to feel safe. You begin to understand that nothing real will ever require you to betray yourself to keep it. You don't lose your ambition. You just stop confusing effort with worth. You don't lose your drive. You just stop letting fear drive it. What you gain is a deeper kind of strength, one that doesn't shout but stands firm, one that doesn't need to be seen to feel secure. Socrates said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." And when you trust yourself, you finally give yourself permission to think, feel, and act from truth. Not habit, not fear, not someone else's expectations. That's when life starts to feel different, not always easier, but clearer, more grounded, more real. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You stop stretching yourself thin to prove you can handle it all. And in that stopping, in that stillness, you remember who you are. Not the version molded by pressure, but the one shaped by peace. The one that doesn't need to earn love or success or belonging. Because you already belong, you already are. And that's what trust brings you back to, every single time. You don't need to become anything else to be worthy. You just need to remember who you were before the world convinced you to prove it. That's the quiet power of trust. It returns you to yourself. If this message stayed with you, take a moment to watch one of the videos on your screen now. It's there for a reason. Something in it might be exactly what you need next. Thank you for being part of Stoic Journal. Your presence here means more than you know. Until next time, stay steady, stay grounded, and remember, peace isn't something you chase. It's something you come home to.